Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watch You Want, and thanks for logging on. Today we're looking at the Roger Dubuis King Square, 40 millimeters in titanium. This is one of 888 made. Now, since 2008, the King Square has been Roger Dubuis of Geneva's standard bearer for essentially an architectural echo in wristwatch form. It has the bold presence, it has the faceted forms, it has the machine-like aesthetic of the SAW, the sports activity watch line from the early 2000s, but it's not a dive watch. Instead, it embodies the interlocking materials, the interlacing facets, and the interplay of different shapes, details, macro and micro, that you find in a cityscape, and I'll explore that in the shape of the case, the triple-faceted sapphire, and the complex dial. But first I want to put the watch on my wrist. Now, although it is 40 millimeters across, the watch is big. It has tremendous stance. It's about 50 millimeters lug to lug. So you can see on my wrist, which is 6 1/3 inches, 16 centimeters in circumference, it really does envelop my entire wrist. But it's a nice, comfortable, ergonomic feel because it is almost perfectly one-to-one. As the name suggests, it is a King Square, so it distributes its mass very nicely. You can also see that, like the triple-faceted sapphire itself, the case has a little bit of built-in loft or arc from lug to lug, so it actually curves with the wrist, and the ergonomic equation is excellent, very much in favor of this watch playing nice with a small wrist. I would say down to as small as 15 centimeters or 6 inches in circumference. Now you can see in profile the watch is not that thick. It's about 13.5 millimeters at its thickest, but in reality, because the bezel, the titanium polished bezel, slopes down so dramatically at the flanks, a tighter sleeve or a cuff will ride up and over this one pretty easily. Now, another part of the winning ergonomic equation is this Roger Dubuis natural vulcanized rubber strap. I want to focus on that because I've called out Roger Dubuis straps as one of the real highlights of their sports watches in the past, and that continues here with the King Square. The nice thing about it is it feels supple on the wrist, and although it has no gap where it joins the case, so you get that seamless look of a conforming strap, it doesn't have the rigidity of a conforming strap. It will pull more or less straight down. As you saw on my wrist, the fit was secure. It wasn't tight in the confining sense, but it was tight in the secure sense. It really does make this oversized modern sports watch very viable for a smaller wrist. And a big part of the comfort factor here is this Roger Dubuis, this very elaborate double trigger deployant Roger Dubuis titanium deployant clasp. Now, likewise, I've highlighted the exceptional finish of Roger Dubuis clasps. As much as I like their straps, I like their clasps even more. And you can see that level of detail. All brushed finish on the centers. You can see that little details like the screw heads or the bolt heads are individually polished. But you also have thoughtful, playful details like the Roger Dubuis initials within the deployant hinge itself, as well as a small, repetitive Roger Dubuis motif, let's see if we can get that in the light, visible on the underside of the clasp. Again, no detail was overlooked, and just to hammer that point home, even the individual double deployant triggers are coated with a very soft, very supple, very subtle black vulcanized rubber. Roger Dubuis truly leaves no stone unturned. Beautifully made. It's just as beautiful on the outside. Now, there's another element that Roger Dubuis brings to the table here, and that is artful use of rubber inserts. Now, Roger Dubuis was a bit ahead of the curve here, although rubber inserts are now finding their way onto everything up to and including FP Journe watches. They are very difficult to work with. For one thing, anything that's molded is very difficult to confine to the more or less fixed, stamped, or machined geometry of a piece of metal. So the fact that the rubber inserts on the case flanks, on the lug tops, on the crown itself and within the crown, as well as on the buckle, are integrated so seamlessly is a real tribute to the artisanal prowess of Roger Dubuis craftsmen. Now, I do want to polish this gorgeous triple-faceted crystal because it's an essential element of the architectural expression that this watch makes. It's making a statement that is distinctly modernist. Now, since the 1920s, modernism has come in many forms, but in its original and arguably purest form, if we want to go back to the Dutch de Stijl architects of the 1920s, that theory was that more or less A machine should be expressed on the outside. So a house is a machine for living, and a watch is a machine for telling time. So the structure, the rigid frames, the scaffoldings, everything that's holding up the house is expressed on the outside of a de style house. And likewise, that cityscape, the skyscraper that stretches upward, the bridge that spans up and over, everything from the girders of an elevated railroad track to the frames of buildings still under construction. That's what Roger Dubuis wants to evoke with this multifaceted, complex case. All titanium, so it's very comfortable and very light in the hand. Its geometry, its forms, its character lines are where it derives its strength. And that continues on the dial. Now the dial is very elaborate, and it has multiple parts, multiple layers, and multiple elements. It also has multiple colors, which I like. So it has that playful quality of the traditional big Roger Dubuis sports watch. Now moving down from the bezel, this triple-faceted sapphire, I really have to try to get a good angle of that before we move in. It gives the watch an absolute one-of-a-kind look. There is nothing else out there like this Roger Dubuis King Square, and the sapphire is a big part of that. But when we get into the haute, this chapter ring that is concave and slopes down to the guilloche dial itself, Roger Dubuis is using these red multifaceted garnet inserts as the hour indices, and they're basically translucent red gemstones that are inserted in place of traditional hour markers and outboard of the highly stylized Romans. The Romans themselves are diamond polished, white gold applied. They're beautiful in direct light, and even in oblique light they have a distinct glimmer about them that really animates this dial. Likewise, the framing of the center of the dial with its inverted waffle guilloche and the sub-seconds at 3 o'clock has a brilliant polished luster to it. Again, it's that light and dark contrast that you see amongst the sides of glittering buildings, the top of the Chrysler building, the window panes of the Seagram's building in New York City, that distinct glimmer of metal and glass that's characteristic of modernist architecture, especially high-rise cityscape modernist architecture. It's captured here in the geometries and the details of the King Square. And square, rectilinear, right angles, perpendicular lines, that is a recurring motif in the King Square, and it's executed to the nth degree, but never overboard. Roger Dubuis does a good job of achieving balance with the style, everything from the way the lines play with each other to the multiple layers to the interplay of different colors, the light and the dark, and the graceful slivers of red luminova on the center of the faceted, diamond-polished hands. Everything here works. Now the Roger Dubuis caliber RD15 automatic movement on the back. I wish I could show you a better view of it, but there are limits to what the iPhone can achieve. It is full Geneva Seal. It is a Roger Dubuis in-house movement. At least I can show you the balance wheel and the swan's neck regulator there. But everything here is finished to that August Geneva Seal standard. It holds up under a loupe. So if I'm disadvantaged with the iPhone, I have to say that the naked eye is almost just as poor an instrument for truly appreciating the degree to which Roger Dubuis craftsmen have gone to finish this watch. Every edge of every bridge is beveled beautifully to a mirror shine. Every jewel countersink is polished with that partridge eye gleam and glimmer. It's a radiant rim that when viewed under the loupe is just as beautiful as the black polished swan's neck regulator. It has that same mirror-like optical sheen. Now the swan's neck, a gorgeous and traditional graceful regulating organ, often seen on older pocket watches, is recapitulated here in wristwatch form, but it still has the property of helping to resist shock-induced error that can move a traditional timing index and change the rate of the balance. So not only is it gorgeous and beautifully done in this Geneva Seal movement, but it has practical benefits as well. Likewise, Roger Dubuis evokes traditional pocket watch architecture by equipping this thoroughly modern automatic winding movement with separate cocks for the escapement, the third, and the fourth wheels of the drivetrain. So very elaborate, requires a lot of additional finish because of all those extra shear edges that have to be mirror polished, beveled down, and cleanly completed. But it's worth it because the degree of effort that goes into this movement imparts a lasting artistic value, like the very best of modernist architecture from which the watch itself derives its inspiration. Now that movement does feature exceptional thinness. It's 3.43 millimeters It is 171 parts and 33 jeweled, so all the modern standards are present. 4 Hertz, that is 28,800 vibrations per hour, and in addition to being automatic, it features ceramic rotor bearings and a fully skeletonized rotor, so you can still see the movement, even though the rotor is going to obscure part of it. That's a thoughtful measure for anyone finishing movements to a high degree and including automatic winding. While at center, those ceramic bearings are going to allow the rotor to operate long-term without lubrication, virtually maintenance-free. So this watch really runs the gamut. Mechanical tributes to the pocket watch era, aesthetic tributes to early to mid-century modernism, and of course the fit, finish, and degree of detailing befitting a 21st century luxury product, as well as the use of high-tech natural rubber and titanium construction. Roger Dubuis really gives you everything, and then some, with this Roger Dubuis King Square 40mm in titanium, one of 888 made.